Welcome back to Making Money Matter, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really delighted today to introduce you to Keith Weiner. Keith is the founder of Monetary Metals, and he actually came out to Australia and spoke at the Gold Conference. It was back in 2019, and he's really a leading authority on real money versus credit. And as I said, he's the founder of Monetary Metals. So we're going to get into all of that. Now, before that, he was a bit of a computer nerd. He had this computer software business. He sold that to Nortel. We might talk a little bit about that. And he went from being a computer geek to a monetary geek because he's done a very deep dive into how money works, what is real money, and as a result, understanding why people need to really understand precious metals is true money and true wealth going forward. So Keith, I think I got it right. I think you started Monetary Metals in 2012, and you've had some phenomenal growth. And I'd like to just say congratulations. You've joined the Inc. 5000, which is all about the 5,000 fastest growing companies. So strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen. This is one company going places. And I want you to understand what they do is they give a yield for your gold paid in gold. So a yield on your gold. For those of you that sit around and go, oh, but gold doesn't give me any yield. Well, Monetary Metals have got a solution for that. We'll talk about that. But I love the fact that, Keith, you really understand not only the history of money, but where we're going today and why. I guess some of the things I want to ask you today is, are we in trouble? Do we really need to look at precious metals in a more focused way? And I guess, will we ever go back to a gold standard, or is it not necessary? So welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me, Kerry.
Well, let me just start by asking you, I said before, you went from being a computer geek to a monetary geek, if you like. And I want to know what changed you from working in software to setting up Monetary Metals? What was it that you saw that you thought, you know what, people need to understand this a little bit more?
So I built a company was called Diamondware, and I founded that in 1994, built that up over 14 years, and sold it August 19, 2008. So we were just 2 days shy of the 17th anniversary of selling that company. And if you think back to what was happening at that time,
global financial crisis.
There was a crisis. Now, when you're an entrepreneur, first of all, number one, you're not really studying the economy too much because you're nose to the grindstone, building a business, winning customers, keeping customers, and then the process of being acquired. Like so, I say to people, life of an entrepreneur is not what most people would call normal. It's very intense. It's a roller coaster. The highs are euphoric, the lows are despairing, and that's life. And but the life of being acquired, especially, I didn't really have a management team as such in that company. Made the life of being an entrepreneur the first 13 and a half years seem normal by comparison. It was very intense. There were several months where every phone call was a crisis. Deal being renegotiated because obviously the stock market's crashing, Nortel shares were crashing, all kinds of horrible things were going on. And, you just want to get the deal done. And you think you're really smart and you really worked hard and you had a clever idea and you had a great team, all of which may be true. And then, acquisition deals in that particular time, it came down to the timing of things like lawyer summer vacations.
Yeah.
And, because you're not in control of it. I mean, there's a major company. It was an 8-month process. Started in earnest really in January, and it closed in August. And there were 4 companies that I know of, including Diamondware, that were in the process of being acquired. One other one was announced and closed, and the other 2 did not, because of the timing. Right. So the day we closed, 2 of the Nortel guys flew in from Ottawa to Phoenix, and because of the time zone difference, they're 3 hours ahead, but it's about, I don't know, a 4-hour flight. They were able to come into the office in the morning, they got in the evening, we had a small private, dinner, and then the next day we began integration as part of, Nortel. And, months and months later, when I was talking to one of them about when did Nortel headquarters know that they were in crisis and spiraling into bankruptcy, and he told me a story of the CTO said it was really, really bad the morning of the 19th. So it's possible, right? So the timing came down to certainly a matter of a day or two.
Yeah.
The CEO went out to the Wall Street on September 2nd. It was less than 2 weeks after the acquisition. The wheels are coming off.
Wow.
It's possible that they knew the morning of the 19th, but hadn't yet called the mergers and acquisitions group, which was in Richardson, Texas, an hour behind them in time zone, and obviously, the southern part of the United States versus Canada. And it's possible they just simply hadn't told them yet. Call off all the acquisitions, stop the presses, because they did that clearly for the other two deals that were late stage, but mine got through, and it's surreal. You feel very bemused. I said to my wife, I don't want to make any financial moves for 90 days. I just want to let this settle. I did get a 911 turbo, but that was the only thing I did. And that happened to be the 90 days that lined up almost perfectly with the worst 90 days of the crash. Now, the first part of it looked like a market correction, at least it looked to me with what I knew at that time. Oh, great, goody, everything's going on sale. This is a great time to be an investor with a lot of cash. And, but as it continued to play out, it was clear that something was gravely wrong. It was clear that nobody knew what the hell was going on. And so I began to read all the usual suspects. I got one or two books from everybody in our space and all the conventional people, and I just started to read. I was like a moth drawn to flame, just obsessed with, okay, how do I protect myself, right? I mean, I worked 14 years to come into this cash. It's sitting in a couple too big to fail banks. What do I do? And eventually came to realize, yes, there's a problem in the monetary system. Yes, the monetary system is on a self-destruct course. Gold is going to be part of the solution. So I started to develop my ideas around what my next company might be. I wanted to be part of the solution. Like in a normal world, it would have been another software company. My team had followed me to hell and back. They were saying, we're ready. Being at a big company was no fun. We weren't getting any traction anyway. I mean, Ortel was bankrupt, and after that was Avaya. They didn't care. They didn't know what they had, and they didn't care. I had access to capital. I had great advisors. But as I really studied this, and so I came to be a student of this crazy old Hungarian professor named Fekete, who I think I think you organized a conference for him to come.
Well, no, Marcus Matthews did the conference with Professor Fekete. I actually spoke to him, but I never met him. But yeah, that was back in the day when we were just starting.
Yeah, so back in 2008 or 2009 or something, I became his student, started to write, shared some of my essays with him, as you do. And then at one point he was really excited. He's like, I think you have enough material for a PhD. You should do it. I dropped out of school. I never thought I'd be back for anything, let alone a soft science like economics. I mean, what the hell? But there I was doing it. I joked that he really snookered me because the paper I shared with him was 6 pages. The dissertation at the end of the day was 126 pages. But it was a lot of fun, and I don't regret a minute of it. The studies in the degree was monetary science. I mean, it was enough economics to understand economics, but really a focus on money. What is money? And nobody thinks about it. Nobody defines it. And how has our world gone wrong? Well, there used to be a coffee commercial in the United States. I think it was for Sanka, which was the first decaf brand.
Oh, I remember Sanka.
And the commercial was, we've secretly replaced, Mr. Jones's coffee with Sanka. Let's see if he notices.
Yeah.
And it's like, we've secretly replaced their money with credit. Let's see if they notice. And that's 1971, or arguably 1933, but for Americans. So anyway, that's been playing out, and this system is grinding itself down, and getting worse and worse. And you in your lead-in, you said, "Are we in trouble?" I was going to joke and say it's a really short interview. Yes, we are. Okay, interview over.
Actually,
Yeah,
I'm actually going to stop you for a moment because you said something a second ago, and I don't believe most people understand this. You said, "What is money?" Define that for us.
so I wrote a series on anti-concepts related to money, and anti-concept is a way of improperly defining a word. And when if I assert something, if I say every time you get a job, that's a zero-sum interaction where you lose and the employer wins, it's pretty easy to reject that and say, well, that sounds like communism. I don't agree with that. But if I define a job as exploitation or something like that, if you accept the definition, I can smuggle it in underneath your sort of active radar. And if you accept that definition, then who knows what I might, manipulate you into believing as a function of that. So the definition today that virtually everybody else uses is money is the medium of exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And so I gave a talk. For some reason, they invited me to an academic Austrian economics conference at the University King Juan Carlos in Madrid. And I was the second speaker of the day. The first speaker said, "Gold is money, nothing else," quoting J.P. Morgan, the man who said that in testimony to Congress in 1912. And unfortunately, the rest of his talk was pictures of old gold coins that are of numismatic interest, like, what is the Lydia, Lydia was the first to coin gold. Before that, it was in bars and other forms, but they actually made a standard coin in 600 BC. It was all sort of interesting, but not economically interesting. And then at the end, they ripped him a new one. And I'm just biting my tongue because I know I'm going to say the same thing, but I'm going to say it in a different way. And so because of the way they treated him, and maybe for other reasons, I got, you have to understand Europeans are very diffident and very different from Americans in demeanor. And we Americans can be brash and aggressive. And so I just put this chip on my shoulder. And, my lead into that particular thing, I covered several things in my talk. But in my lead in, I said, in every era, there's a question hanging in the air, screaming out, begging to be answered. And I talked about in the day of Copernicus, that question was, if everything goes around the Earth, how do you explain the retrograde motion? The planets apparently, they go forward and apparently backwards a bit, and then some more and backwards. And if everything's going around the Earth, there is no explanation for this. It doesn't make any sense. When you realize that we and the other planets are all going around the sun, from our vantage point of one of those orbits, there are certain planets that look like they have retrograde, but it's an artifact of how we're passing them or they're passing us in orbit. So I said, in our era, here's the question. I said, let's go back to the 19th century. And I had a picture of a bank teller window. And, you could walk up with this isn't a dollar bill, but you could walk up with a $20 bill, which I actually had one for demo purposes for that talk. And you could just wordlessly pass this across the window to the teller, and nobody needed any explanations. The teller would give you back a 1-ounce gold coin. Right? That was just well understood. Now today, if you gave the teller at a bank 20, what would he do? Give you back a 10 and 5 and 5 ones? I mean, it's not even clear what do you even want. And there's certainly no such thing as redeemability for gold. So I said, here's the question that's hanging in the air, screaming to be answered. If the word for the piece of paper, which at that time was gold redeemable, today we've made it irredeemable, but if the word for that piece of paper is money, then what is the word for the gold coin that comes back at you? Now I said, look, you don't owe me, and I got very pugnacious, you don't owe me any answers to this. I'm just some annoying American. I'm going to get on a jet plane tomorrow and go back to the States and leave you in peace. And, there were one or two other Americans at the conference, mostly Europeans, obviously located in Europe. I said, but you owe yourselves an answer, and you owe yourselves an answer that is rigorous. And at the end of unbeknownst to me, one of the later talks was talking about rigor in answers. And the founder of the Austrian school, Karl Menger, had this ongoing argument with this German historical school guy named Schmuller was his like arch nemesis. And Schmuller was a dishonest, today I guess you'd call him kind of a Keynesian apologist for the state and, everything else. And he challenged him. He said, okay, you gave me an answer, but it's not a rigorous one. Rigor is important. I didn't realize that was going to be a topic of a whole talk. So it played into what I said, but I said, you owe yourselves a rigorous answer. And, when I was done with my talk, all the people that had ripped the previous speaker apart were silent. I got 2 or 3 sort of ordinary questions about, well, you said this happened. What was the year again? And I just want to take it, it's like those kind of questions. And then, they let me go back to my seat without, any further ado. And, of course, the word for the piece of paper is an IOU. It's a note or bill. Those are both words for credit. We'll have to pay credits to pay something, right? And the money is the thing being paid, not the piece of paper. If you go to a fancy restaurant and you check your coat and they give you that little coat check slip. I don't know if you have that in Australia, but
We do. Yep.
Obviously common in Europe and certainly in New York. In Arizona, it's warm enough that, if you've forgotten what coat hooks look like, But, you got that coat slip, coat check. That is not a coat. And, if for some reason a market developed and people are trading these coat slips, imagine if they shorten it instead of calling it coat slip or coat check, they start calling it coat. It's not a coat. It will not keep you warm and dry when it's cold and rainy outside. And the piece of paper that says, I'm going to pay you the money if you want to redeem it is not the money. So what's the money? It is a commodity. It has to be a commodity. It has to be a physical thing that when you don't like the terms of the banking system, whether it's the interest rate or the risk, you have to be able to take your marbles home. And that has to be physically, not marbles, it has to be some physical thing that you take home.
Why does it have to be something physical that you take home? Because I know that I'm going into simplicity here, but because we've been on this credit system for so long, most people were born into a credit system. It's all they know. And when you say you've got to take your marbles home, they're like, I've never had to take my marbles home before. Why should I start to do it now? And my pieces of paper have lasted me extremely well for the whole time I've been alive.
Well, most people, especially wealthy people, don't actually hoard lots and lots of dollars. When you get to a certain point, what do? They buy properties. Mm-hmm. They buy equities. They buy fine old whiskeys and wine and antique cars and old masters' paintings.
Yeah.
And that's a sign that they're grasping about, and obviously some of them buy gold too. They're grasping about looking for something that will hold its value, because even the proponents of this system know that it's designed to lose value. They defend, right? Milton Friedman himself had the K% rule. He said the money should be inflated at K% per year, and he argued K should be 3. Our central banks today all have an official policy stance of 2. Everyone knows it's going down. So they say the fact that it's going down is a feature, not a bug. And of course, to protect yourself for long periods of time, if you're planning to save for retirement or you're planning on intergenerational, wealth transfer to your grandkids, of course, it's not going to be a sack of paper bills or a bank account with currency in it. So everyone kind of knows that. Now, but the bigger issue is when the interest rate drops below below your preference. You have no teeth. Everyone can complain, right? So in Europe, it went negative. In a lot of other places, it was 0, effectively. I don't know how low it got in Australia. In 2020, the 10-year Treasury, the 10-year Treasury got down to 0.65% in 2020. That's below any rational, thing, and that's the moment of taking the marbles home. Is okay, if you're not going to pay me enough interest, then why should I bother lending to you? But people don't quite think of it as lending, and that's part of the problem is we've been brainwashed. So there's a quote from Goethe. I don't know how you say it. Goethe, I guess. Said, "None are so hopelessly enslaved as those who falsely believe that they are free." I think, okay, we have a free market, we've got money, this is great, and yet they've been trapped in this thing, they've been propagandized everything between tax law, investment regulation, government schools. We've been trained to think of the dollar as money. If you go to Google Images and you type in, I want to see pictures of money, you get page after page after page of what? Paper with green ink on it. You won't see gold coins anywhere on that search. So the propaganda is nearly 100% complete. But anyway, it has to be a physical good. And with all the different physical goods, you start to get into what properties does it need to have. It has to be divisible. Every divided piece has to be equivalent to any other divided piece. And there goes all your precious stones. And then it has to be recombinable. If you keep making change and you grind it down to sand, you have to be able to melt it back to one big bar or coin again. So it has to be a metal. And then of all the metals, gold is the one that has all the right properties. It doesn't tarnish. It's very value dense. It's the historical thing. They didn't have the technology to refine platinum in those days. So it certainly couldn't be that. And you had gold and you had silver. And that's money. So one of the things I just want to brag slightly, we occasionally get to conduct experiments in monetary science. This is the geek coming out in me for a minute. So we do, gold leases, silver leases, gold bonds, silver bonds, and when each metal, we pay the interest in kind. So if you lease gold to us, we pay the interest in gold. If you lease silver to us, we pay the interest in silver. We had one platinum lease where a big customer of ours said, I want to lease some platinum. Do you do that? I said, well, we haven't, but maybe we could. We went to our customers and said, who here is up for a platinum lease? A lot of people. It was like 5 times oversubscribed. It was great.
Wow.
Okay. So, we arranged it, and then we're getting down to all the details. We said to our customers, would you like to be paid the interest in kind? Do you want the platinum lease to pay platinum interest, or do you want it in gold?
Gold.
I would say before I give away the answer, I'll give away one hint. It was unanimous. So there's a large group of clients who largely don't know each other, and so they're not talking to each other and colluding. 100% of them agreed on what they wanted. There was not a single dissent. And the answer was gold. Thus, I think proving, so that should be written as a paper and submitted to a peer-reviewed journal in monetary science, if there is such a journal. That proves platinum is not money. Because when you're leasing an expensive industrial agreement, you want to be paid money, and the money is the gold. And these, by the way, are people that were happy to own platinum. They believed in that the price of platinum was going to go up. Otherwise, they wouldn't take a platinum exposure.
Right.
But for their platinum exposure, they wanted to be paid the rent or the interest in gold, in money. And so that's how it's been for thousands of years. It is what it is. Nothing is going to come along to change it. And we need to rediscover the difference between money and credit. Money is the final payment. Credit is always an intermediate. So if I owe you $1,000 and I take out and count, $50, $20 bills, okay, I'm out of the debt loop, right? We're all good between us, and if you can't argue I owe you anything. If you ever went to court with me, they would say you got paid in full. What else do you want, right? That's what legal tender law says. But now, if you look at what those dollar bills say on them, they actually don't say the word bill. In the U.S., they say Federal Reserve note. There's that word for credit again. It's a note. The Federal Reserve owes you the money. Now, what do? Well, you deposit the money as you think of it, but it's really a note. You deposit the notes in a bank. Now, the bank owes you the money. A bank deposit is not money. It's bank credit. You are an unsecured creditor of the bank.
Yep.
And everyone says, well, the banks are safe because of regulation, as if regulation can make something like that, safe, somehow magically. So now the bank owes you the money, and what does the bank do? Well, they don't just sit there and put paper bills in a safe. They invest those to get a return, and so they invest those in treasuries, or they increase their balance at the Federal Reserve. So either the Treasury owes the bank or the Federal Reserve owes the bank. And ultimately, at the root of the system, the Federal Reserve credit is backed only by the Treasury's bond, and the Treasury's bond is payable only in Federal Reserve credit. So at the very base of the system, so it's turtles all the way down, except to the very bottom level where you find the circularity. You know, side A of the piece of paper says see side B. You turn it around, side B says see side A.
Okay.
And that's it. And so what that means is you can't extinguish a debt because you pay a debt using an IOU, and the
So you
debt,
pay a debt to get a debt to pay a debt to get a debt.
so the debt grows exponentially because it can
Okay.
never be extinguished. It must grow at least the rate of the accrued interest, and actually a lot more. If you study Austrian economics, you know change happens at the margin. In order for the system to assure that the marginal debtor has enough to repay, you have to flood a heck of a lot more than just the accrued interest. The marginal guy is the one who's the last one to get, fresh. It takes revenues to service debt. Actually, it takes profits to service debt.
It's almost a
So you have to
Ponzi
keep.
scheme, Keith.
Um, you could call it that,
I
and
mean, got all the attributes.
pyramid. It's definitely pyramid in nature, and it definitely relies on yeah. So it's an unhealthy thing, and most people focus their criticism on the fact that the dollar loses value over time, which is certainly true. It does. Um, but I'm making a much more deadly accusation. I'm saying the whole nature of it is unsound. The whole nature of it is counterfeit or fraudulent, at its root. And therefore, if all it was the dollar lost its value, and let's say that the official inflation statistics are all wrong, and let's say that the actual rate, if you go to Shadow Stats or someplace like that, that says 8% or whatever, let's suppose that's what it is. Then it's a tax. And okay, sure, taxes are bad. But we have income tax that's, for multiples higher than that. It wouldn't be that urgent. It's like, okay, so don't own too many dollars when you have enough dollars and invest in something. But the point is, it wouldn't be unstable. If all it was a slow loss of value over time, it's gone on for 100+ years. It can go on for another 100 years, another 1,000 years. You should worry about income tax much more than the inflation tax. But that's not the root of it. The problem I'm talking about is the whole thing is unsound and fraudulent. And that means that it's going to come to an end. The whole system is going to collapse. And that's a calamity. That's not the same thing as a steady drip, drip, drip erosion of value, saying the
But
whole thing fails.
I'm going to jump in here and say there are people with much more, should I say, power and influence than either of us that have got a vested interest in making sure that this system does not collapse and continues to keep going for 100 or 1,000 years. They've kept it going for this long. I can see it continuing because the majority of the slaves, people, whatever you want to say, in the world today rely on this piece of paper to continually be put through the system, if you like. Even if it gives them pain from the inflationary pressures, they will continue to use it because they don't see any alternative. And the powers that be that want the system to keep going, it's in their vested interest to make sure it does. So
Of course.
Why would
Of course.
you say?
Yeah, so that's the exact answer I give when people say the powers that be are leading us towards a great reset. And I'm like, show me an example in history where the people who are in power prior to a reset are still have power or even their heads after a reset happens. Of course not. They are vested, they're all in on preserving it, and they'll do everything they can. But King Canute, who certainly had more power than you or I, because he was king, and he could order, tens or hundreds of thousands of Scandinavians to do what he wanted, said the tide, ordered the tide to go back. And when you're up against natural law, you actually don't have that power. And you could send all your warriors into the surf with their swords and their shields, but you don't really fight the tide very effectively with swords and shields. So when you look at nature and when you look at engineering systems, anything that is an exponential growth trend ends very badly. I like to use the example of an electric guitar. So if an electric guitar is held close to the speaker, powered by the amplifier, the speaker is vibrating, it's moving air. the air then, if you're close enough, the air hits the strings of the guitar and makes them vibrate more. And then the strings vibrating more send the electrical signal to the amplifier to make the speaker, vibrate more. That's a positive feedback loop that will grow exponentially. And so you get that squeal, when Jimi Hendrix holds his guitar up to the speaker. If they didn't put special circuitry in to limit this, then what would happen is, amplifiers get hotter and hotter the more, current that they put out. Eventually, the amplifier would catch on fire and burn down the house.
Right.
Every example of an exponential trend ends with a catastrophic, if you have a bunch of uranium in a pile and then the neutron, uranium decays and it spits out neutrons, I think, and that neutron hits another uranium atom and causes it to split, and that sends out, it's more than one neutron is what it is. 2 neutrons or 4 neutrons, I'm forgetting my physics now. And then that causes 2 more, and that causes 2 more. You get this runaway exponential trend. Well, if that's what it is, you get a nuclear, explosion. It's the most violent explosion ever created by man. These things don't end gracefully. They don't come back down gently. They grow and grow and grow faster and faster and faster until they blow up. And it's not within anybody's power to stop the blow up. Now, if they keep us from using any alternative, then when the monetary system collapses, the government collapses, civil order collapses, society collapses, production collapses, the population collapses, and that's more or less 476 AD. So are we in trouble? Yeah, we're in really big trouble. That's a horrific thing that nobody should want. And we should, a lot of people try to prep for it, the preppers, and they're not wrong. I mean, if this is coming, maybe you can come up with a way of surviving, and you have some remote mountain location, and you have a cellar full of dried food and whatever, and you have a bunch of arable land. But just understand that, the best case scenario post-collapse is like an 18th century agrarian society where now you're working the land to produce food. And because I started thinking about how do I prepare, where do I go, what do I do? I was looking at buying a big bunch of land in South Island of New Zealand.
But
And then you
again,
go
Keith,
there.
I think we're so far, aren't we more, what's the word I'm looking for? Sophisticated these days with systems, and aren't we more sophisticated these days with population growth concerns, ability to whether it's immigration, whether it's controlling the money supply, or I'm saying controlling the money supply, I should say controlling the currency supply. But I said it before, you say catastrophic collapse. I say, I think that there's so many powers that be, if you like, and you did mention King Canute, but it doesn't matter who it is. There's so much power behind keeping this alive for much longer than you and I are going to be alive. Should we care?
The question is, can they keep it alive that long?
And my answer is, I think they could. Why do you think that they couldn't?
So the root of this thing kind of comes down to what exactly is inflation? And most people would say, well, it's an increase in the quantity of what we call money. And most people believe in the quantity theory of money that says, okay, if that happens, then the prices of all consumer goods go up proportionately. Now, there was certainly a massive, massive, massive increase in the quantity from 1981 to 2022. And yet prices were soft, yeah, in a lot of cases rising due to increases in regulation and compliance costs, but nothing near the proportionality of the increase in the quantity of dollars. So what's really going on? If you look at the concept of before you can consume, you must produce.
Okay.
Well, okay. So a lot of people think that means I have to produce a consumer good to trade you for a consumer good. But what if I'm consuming a capital good? So what if I'm, let's say running a factory that took $1 billion investment initially, and I'm just operating it to make a cash profit on I buy my raw materials for a dollar, I produce something and I sell it for $1.10 with no amortization and no budget to replace the factory. Then as the factory wears out, right? So I'm consuming the capital good. And yes, I'm producing and we're trading, and I can call it a profit if I want. But if I don't take into account the depreciation of the factory, it's not actually a profit. So what the system does, and it's, the mechanics of this get a little bit involved, um, but I've written about this and I've given other talks about this, is it incentivizes the consumption of capital. And so, yeah, we live in a modern society with huge populations by medieval standards, let alone standards of the ancient world. How do we support that population?
Mm.
By producing energy and food at vast industrial scale. What happens if you cannot continue to produce energy or food? Something disrupts that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going to be a catastrophic event, and people are going to starve. And of course, nobody wants to be the one who starves, so people will kill their neighbors for the rumor of food. And that's the Mad Max scenario. Um, so that's what we're doing, is we're consuming capital, pretending it's all good, and it seems to be all good as long as it lasts. And every socialist utopia sort of takes the same path. In Venezuela, they elected this guy Hugo Chavez,
Mm-hmm.
and Chavez, said about consuming all the capital. So think of the communists loot some fantastic 18th century French mansion, and then for a while you're literally busting up the furniture and throwing it in the fireplace to keep warm.
Mm.
And while it lasts, you can say, well, okay, it's not as good as it was under the feudal lords, but it's okay. We're warm, we have food, right? Because you're eating the seed corn out of the bin over the winter, and you're burning the furniture. But what do you do when you run out of furniture, and what do you do when the seed bin is empty, and now it's time to plant another crop? The next year is going to be infinitely worse. And so Chavez consumed Venezuela's capital, and then right around the time he died, and this guy Nicolas Maduro
Maduro.
took over, they said, well, why can't Maduro, continue the Chavez miracle? Well, the problem was, as Margaret Thatcher said, eventually you run out of other people's money. Venezuela ran out of other people's money or other people's capital.
Mm.
And so we're consuming the capital that makes modern civilization possible. And there's a finite terminus to this. It's not forever. Now, entrepreneurs are always creating new capital. So there's kind of a race condition. To go back to my computer geek days, you have two threads that are both running without checks and balances. And if one of them gets to the finish line first, everything's fine. If the other one gets to the finish line first, you get a crash or some sort of interlock or something, computer stops responding. So, we're producing more capital and we're destroying capital. Which one of those is occurring faster determines their fate. So, unfortunately, the consumption of capital is growing exponentially.
Okay.
It will win in the end.
And that's just a function of the system, if you like.
Yeah, the system is designed that way, and it's just math. That's how it will be in the end. So, again, I don't like to be the doom and gloomer alarmist.
Yeah,
I heard a term
because most people will turn around and say, yeah, whatever, and they'll keep going on with their lives because they just don't
right,
believe it, because it sounds too catastrophic to even contemplate.
right, and then the doom and gloomer is either they just keep throwing statistics at you, as if that's going to persuade you. But then, of course, for every doom statistic, there's statistics that makes things look good. The stock market's going up, or GDP is going up, or whatever. Unemployment ticks down 1/10 of a percentage point. And so it's a battle of statistics, and nobody ever really wins, and life goes on. What I'm trying to do is illustrate certain universal truths, starting with the word for the piece of paper is not money. The word for the thing that redeems it is money, and building up from there. You have to start from first premises. The entire edifice is rotten all the way down to the core of it. What passes for monetary economics today is almost like the medievals, right? So the quantity theory of money is very convenient for the socialists because it distracts everybody from increasing productivity. right? So every year, every company is finding new ways to do even more with even less.
Yeah.
And so if you somehow had a money that was losing value, right? So I wrote an article for the Sound Money Project, talking about this. So what if you're the central bank governor and you could devalue the money at the same rate that industry is increasing its productivity? And the net result was prices were unchanged. They weren't going up or down. Would that be sound money? Because that's how most people would define it, 0% inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a famous Norman Rockwell painting. Well, most of his paintings are famous. So he painted for the Saturday Evening Post, and he did a new painting every week for decades, I think. Um, this one is called The Double Ride. And so it shows a woman in a butcher store, and she's buying a chicken. And so they had one of those scales that hangs from the ceiling on chains. And then you put the weight on there, and there's a needle that, indicates, what it weighs. And so unseen to the butcher, she is pushing her thumb underneath it to
Oh,
lighten it.
yes.
So she has to pay less.
Yeah.
But then there's the butcher paper is kind of curled over, and he can't see that she's doing that. And meanwhile, he has his finger pushing down on it, but it's behind the chicken, so she can't see him. And I said, suppose that both of them pushed on it with about equal force. Would you call that an honest or sound measurement of the weight of it? Of course not. They're both cheating.
Yeah.
Everybody has to take their fingers off of it, then you get an honest measurement. And if you happen to have this coincidence where they're both pushing at the same amount of force, that's not right. So defining inflation in that way, first of all, distracts everybody from the fact that they're robbing you of the increased productivity that we should be enjoying. It takes far less, time, land, energy, whatever. I wrote an article for Forbes where I looked at the amount of real resources that it took to produce a gallon of milk between 1965 and 2012. And there's some great data from the Wisconsin Dairy Association that let me kind of do that. It's like 90% reduction between land and labor. It was massively more efficient to produce milk just in that bracket. And things continue. So that's defining inflation gives them a free pass to help themselves to all that increased industrial efficiency every year. But the other thing that it does is it distracts away from the fraud, the counterfeit nature of this whole thing. And so if you're and here's the root of it. We call it borrowing, but there's no means and no intent to repay. So imagine you have a problem child. Your son doesn't really want to go to university. It just says, hey, can I borrow $1,000?
Yeah.
And you're like, what are you gonna use that for? Well, I got things to do. How are you gonna repay me? I'll find a way. Now, some parents might give him the $1,000 because they feel they love him or whatever, but nobody in their right mind would say, this is a $1,000 asset, and they put it down on their balance sheet.
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
You're not getting repaid, right? Obviously. Now imagine if we took 100,000 parents that all did that and agglomerated all of those notes from all of those deadbeat teenagers into one giant bond, and we went to a ratings agency and we got a AA rating on it, and we saw a AAA rating on it, and then we sold that bond into the market. That's kind of what we've done in this system, and every time it doesn't get repaid, we just sell a new bond to repay the old one plus the interest. Well, again, there's all of these things point to there's a finite terminus. It doesn't go forever. It can go for a really long time. It can go for much longer. I think the first time I spoke at your conference, because I spoke twice, if I recall. One was 2019. One was around 2012 or maybe 2014.
2012.
In 2012,
Time to come back.
That's what?
Time to come back.
That's right. I should do.
We're running out of time on this one, Keith. So I just want you to do some wrap up notes because we're going to do part 2 in a moment. But just if you could, for my audience that's listening at the moment, we've explained money, we've explained a little bit about inflation. Just if you could, because in part 2 I want to go into what is monetary metals. But for now, just if you could, if this system isn't the system that we need in the future. Give them 3 things that they should be doing right now.
It's really hard what to do because no one person, yeah, we should buy some gold, absolutely, of course, and some silver. Because in a collapse like that, it's always better to have metal than not. It may avail you to get somewhere where there's safety or something, but it may not. And in any case, you're talking about a collapsed world. It's a Mad Max world. I think the most important thing, whenever I'm asked this on interviews, I always say this, is start getting educated, start getting into the root of this. Ask the questions that nobody seems to be asking. Obviously, read my writing. I'm very proud of the material I put out. But whatever you do, start learning about this. Understand this at a deeper and deeper level. Is it true that the system is a credit? And is it true that the Treasury is backed by the, or payable in the dollar, and the dollar is backed by the Treasury? And what does that mean if it's circular? Is that a Ponzi scheme? Is that a pyramid scheme? Start thinking, start asking questions, and that will lead you to 1,000 other ideas that neither I nor any other so-called expert could to tell you what to do. You've got to figure this out for yourself. Unfortunately, we live in a world where you can't trust the experts have corrupted it.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure this out for yourself. It's like figuring out medicine or anything else for yourself. You should be able to trust doctors, but in the case of our monetary doctors, they're cranks.
Righto. Well, we've seen that. Keith, how can they find some of your writings?
So my personal economics blog site is keithweinereconomics.com, and most of my monetary work is on monetary-metals.com.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, there you go. You've got the history of it all in part 2. We're going to get Keith back, and he's going to tell to you all about monetary metals, why he started it, and where he's going to from here, and why he thinks that this is something that people should be doing now. Before I go, let me just say, Keith just mentioned, get yourself educated. So make sure you come along to the Australian Gold Conference, 13th to the 15th of October. No better time to get yourself educated as we head into some very interesting times. And I, for one, want you to stop watching Netflix, start getting educated, go to goldevents.com.au, come along. We've got a free event on the Monday, and then we do the deep dive on the Tuesday and the Wednesday. And then in March next year, Gold Coast Gold. But for now, thanks so much for joining me on Making Money Matter.